What if suffering is not a cruel accident, but the price you pay for refusing to face yourself? What if the anguish that haunts your nights is not meaningless, but a signal you have ignored too long? You think you suffer because life is unfair, but ask honestly how much of your torment comes from wounds you never confronted, truths you buried, masks you will struggle. But suffering, Jung reminds you, is different. Pain faced consciously becomes transformation. Pain evaded becomes endless repetition. You suffer not because of pain itself, but because you resist its message. You repress anger until it corrodes you. You deny grief until it hardens into emptiness. You cover despair with. Is this not the root of your suffering? The refusal to let pain become wisdom? Jung's words confront you with moral weight. To refuse consciousness is to choose chains. To repress your wounds is to let them rule you. To distract yourself endlessly is to ensure the cycle continues. So the question is urgent. Will you keep numbing yourself, or will you use even 23 minutes to face your truth? Because once you confront what you fear, suffering ceases to be your master, and consciousness becomes your crown. Look at the age you live in. Everywhere there are quick fixes for pain, endless distractions, countless ways to numb discomfort. But ask yourself, does this really free you from suffering, or does it only postpone the confrontation? How many times have you noticed that the more you avoid, the heavier your burden grows? Modern life teaches you to escape instead of endure. Yet Jung warned that suffering denied does not vanish, it deepens. You may call it stress, burnout, or bad luck. And what happens when you silence a voice that demands to be heard? It returns louder in illness, depression, conflict, or despair. Is this not the cycle you already live? Fleeing discomfort only to meet it again in darker form. The tragedy is not that you suffer. Pain is inevitable, woven into existence. The tragedy is that you waste suffering, treating it as punishment instead of. Each time you hide behind a mask of strength, you multiply your inner fracture. Each time you choose distraction over confrontation, you guarantee repetition of the same wound. Jung's insight is stark. Suffering unexamined imprisons you. Suffering examined liberates you. To stop wasting your life in cycles of unconscious pain, you must dedicate time, not. Ask yourself, what would change if you stopped fleeing and began listening? Would suffering still hold you, or would it finally release you into consciousness? There is no birth of consciousness without pain. Carl Jung. If you want to understand why suffering stalks you, you must examine the psychic structures that create it. Jung did not see suffering as random misfortune. He saw it as the. Pain is a messenger. Suffering is the punishment you create when you silence that messenger. Ask yourself, are you listening to the wisdom of your pain, or are you treating it as an enemy to be avoided? The first foundation is the shadow. Every part of you that you repress, anger, grief, desire, vulnerability, becomes shadow. You exile it thinking it will vanish. But repression never destroys. From there, it sabotages your life in indirect forms: self-sabotage, anxiety, unexplained despair. When you avoid pain, you strengthen the shadow's hold. You may call it fate, but in truth, it is your own neglected self ruling you from below. How many of your recurring struggles are not accidents, but the shadow demanding to be acknowledged? This is the mask you wear to be accepted, the smiling professional, the strong parent, the tireless achiever. The persona is necessary, but when you identify with it completely, you pay with emptiness. You smile while collapsing inside. You succeed outwardly while decaying inwardly. This dissonance. How much of your life is consumed maintaining an image while your essence starves in silence? The third foundation is the self, the totality of who you are, both conscious and unconscious. The self calls you toward individuation, the process of integrating shadow, persona, and all. Your anxiety, your depression, your conflicts are not meaningless.
They are summons from the self, demanding that you stop betraying your essence. When you ignore them, they become chronic suffering. When you engage them, they become transformation. Are you willing to hear what your suffering has been trying to tell you? Jung insisted that suffering arises not from pain itself, but from
Resistance turns it into endless suffering. Imagine grief. When accepted, it breaks you open and love deepens. When denied, it calcifies into bitterness. Imagine fear. When confronted, it teaches courage. When avoided, it becomes chronic anxiety. How much of your suffering comes not from the event itself, but from your refusal to endure its message? Another crucial principle is projection. What you deny in yourself, you resent their anger, their weakness, their freedom, because it mirrors what you repress. This mechanism multiplies suffering. Instead of confronting your inner conflicts, you fight them externally, in relationships, in work, in society. Every unresolved shadow reappears as a battle outside. How many of your conflicts with others are truly wars with yourself? The final foundation is individuation. This does not mean erasing suffering, but transforming it. Each confrontation with the shadow, each crack in the persona, each painful integration of opposites is a step toward sovereignty. Suffering ends not when you escape pain, but when pain is given meaning as part of the journey to the self. Without this process, you remain fragmented, and fragmentation breeds despair. So, what do these foundations mean for you? They mean that your suffering is not proof of weakness or injustice, but proof that you are resisting your own becoming. They mean that each pang of pain, each restless night, each emptiness is a message, not a curse. They mean that the only way to never suffer. Ask yourself, how long will you keep running from the shadow that only grows stronger in the dark? How long will you cling to the persona while your soul withers unseen? How long will you reject the call of the self, mistaking it for random misfortune? Jung's warning is clear. What you repress, this is the foundation. Suffering ends when you stop resisting your own depths. The choice is before you. Will you live as a mask enslaved by shadows, or will you confront your pain and rise into wholeness? Picture the man who buries his grief beneath a mountain of tasks. His loved one dies, but instead of mourning, he works longer hours, takes on new. Inwardly, the grief he refuses to face corrodes him. He grows restless at night, irritable at night, numb in moments that once brought joy. Years later, he wonders why life feels hollow. Do you see the pattern? He did not suffer only because of loss. He suffered because he denied the pain that demanded his attention. His refusal to grieve transformed clean pain into chronic suffering. Now imagine the woman who lives behind a flawless persona. She is charming, sociable. Friends praise her as the one who always has it together. But when silence falls, despair surges. She feels unseen, unknown, and empty. The mask that wins applause strangles her truth. The more she pretends, the deeper her suffering grows. And yet every time someone asks how she is, she doubles the mask, fearing rejection. How much of your life resembles this performing strength while silently unraveling? Or consider the restless soul who numbs himself daily with distractions, scrolling, binging, drinking, constant chatter. The moment silence comes, anxiety erupts. He cannot sit still because the shadow lurks there. He fears what might surface if he stops running. Yet his avoidance guarantees endless repetition of the same torment. He suffers not from what happens. Have you ever wondered if your compulsive habits are not entertainment, but escape? These are not isolated tragedies. They are common, ordinary examples of how suffering multiplies when you flee pain instead of facing it. Each figure represents a different distortion. The worker who represses grief, the performer who lives in persona, the drifter who numbs his shadow. But the root is identical, resistance to the self. Notice the deception at play. The smiling woman says, "I am keeping it positive." The restless drifter says, "I'm just relaxing." Each lies to themselves, cloaking avoidance in respectable language. But beneath the surface, time bleeds away. Ask yourself, what noble-sounding excuses do you use to avoid confronting your truth? Jung warned that what you resist not only persists, it grows stronger. The man who resists grief, the woman who resists vulnerability, does not escape it, she multiplies her loneliness. The drifter who resists silence does not banish anxiety, he feeds it until it dominates him. This is how suffering becomes a life sentence, by being denied. And yet each of these examples contains its remedy. If the man had allowed himself 23 minutes to grieve each day, to sit in silence, to weep, to honor his loss, his pain could have become love's deepening. If the woman had dropped her mask for even 23 minutes, speaking one honest word of despair to a trusted friend, her persona could have cracked into authenticity, easing her suffering. If the restless drifter had faced silence for 23 minutes, letting the shadow speak, he could have discovered not only fear, but also strength hidden in the dark. The examples show you pain is clean. Suffering is chronic because it is resisted. Which of these examples mirrors your own life? Do you work to death to avoid grief? Do you wear a mask so convincing even you forget it is false? Do you flee silence as though it were an enemy? And, more urgently, how much you are not condemned to suffer endlessly. You are condemned only if you continue refusing to listen. Pain comes to all, but suffering is chosen each time you silence it. 23 minutes of honest confrontation would begin to dissolve the cycle, but avoidance guarantees it will rule you. So the lesson is simple yet severe. Suffering does not spring from fate. It springs from every mask, every distraction, every repression turns pain into tyranny. And the only way to never suffer again is not to escape pain, but to face it consciously. Will you keep rehearsing denial until years vanish? Or will you finally give yourself the time to listen to what your suffering has been? Jung showed that it is not pain itself that enslaves you, but the mechanisms by which the unconscious converts pain into endless torment. These patterns repeat invisibly until you name them, and only then can you dissolve their hold. Ask yourself, are you suffering because life is cruel, or because you have become captive to psychological laws you refuse to see? The first mechanism is avoidance. You keep busy, you distract yourself, you numb with consumption. Avoidance may ease the moment, but it guarantees repetition. What you do not face today will return tomorrow, louder, heavier, more corrosive. This is why unresolved grief resurfaces as depression, why unspoken anger mutates into bitterness. How often have you thought you escaped suffering only to find it waiting for you in another form? The second mechanism is identification with the persona. You wear a mask to protect yourself, but then you forget it is a mask. You convince yourself that the smiling professional, the tireless parent, the agreeable friend is who you truly are. Meanwhile, your deeper self suffocates. Suffering, you cannot keep pretending forever. The split becomes unbearable. How much of your exhaustion comes not from work itself, but from maintaining a false image? The third mechanism is repression and its rebound. Jung warned that what you resist not only persists, but grows stronger. Repression is the act of burying unwanted feelings, anger, desire, grief, fear. But the unconscious does not forget. The repressed, you call it fate, but it is the return of what you refuse to feel. Do you realize how much of your suffering is not random, but the rebound of truths you buried alive? The fourth mechanism is projection. Instead of owning what you deny, you hurl it onto others. You despise in them what you cannot accept in yourself, their selfishness, their weakness, their freedom. Every projection creates conflict, but the battle is not with them. It is with your own shadow reflected back at you. How many of your quarrels are simply wars with yourself, disguised as arguments with others? The fifth mechanism is resistance to meaning. Pain itself can be endured if it is given purpose. But when you refuse to see meaning, you collapse into despair. Suffering becomes unbearable when it feels senseless. Jung insisted that suffering must be integrated into the story. Without this frame, every wound feels like chaos. With it, every wound becomes initiation. Have you noticed how even small hardships are intolerable when they feel pointless? Yet deep losses can be endured when they are embraced as transformative. Together, these mechanisms create a cycle. You avoid pain, repress truth, project blame, cling to and you rationalize it as bad luck, unfairness, or destiny. But destiny is often nothing more than unconscious repetition. Yet there is hope hidden here. Because these mechanisms are psychological, they can be dismantled. You can turn avoidance into attention, persona into authenticity, repression into integration, projection into ownership. The cycle breaks when you dedicate even a small space, 23 minutes, to facing the pain directly. So ask yourself now, which of these mechanisms rules you most? Do you hide behind distraction, behind smiles, behind blame? Do you collapse because you cannot find meaning in your suffering? And most urgently, how many more years will you let these unconscious laws govern your fate while you tell yourself there is nothing you can do? The truth is severe but liberating. Suffering is not arbitrary. Once you do, suffering ceases to multiply. Pain remains, but it becomes teacher, not tyrant. The crown of consciousness begins where the chains of avoidance end. If you are to end needless suffering, you must move from theory to practice. Jung's insight is clear. The unconscious rules until you bring it to light. That means you must carve out deliberate space each day to face what you would rather avoid. Even 23 minutes of honest confrontation can shift the balance of power. The question is not whether you have the time, but whether you have the courage. The first step is ritualized silence. Choose a time each day, morning or evening, where you sit without distraction. No phone, no music, no noise, just you and yourself. In that silence, the discomfort will rise. Thoughts, emotions, restlessness. Instead of fleeing, you observe. You ask, what am I running from? What wound is demanding my attention? These 23 minutes may feel unbearable at first, but that is proof you are touching what you have denied. How long has it been since you gave yourself permission to simply listen? The second step is journaling the shadow. Write down what you feel but never say. Anger, envy, fear, despair, give them words. Patterns will emerge, recurring resentments, buried griefs, desires you fear. Jung insisted that what you repress rules you. Journaling is a way of disarming that rule. Ask yourself, what truths have I hidden, even from myself, and what would happen if I finally named them? The third step is dream attention. Keep a notebook by your bed. Record even fragments. Dreams are the speech of the unconscious. A recurring figure, a repeated place, a haunting image, these are clues. Spend part of your 23 minutes reviewing them. Ask, what is this dream demanding of me? What am I refusing to integrate that my unconscious keeps showing me in disguise? The fourth step is active imagination. Close your eyes, picture the figure that haunts you, an inner critic, a fearful child, a shadowy stranger, and let it speak. Do not censor. Ask, what do you want from me? What role have I refused you in my life? Often, the very force that torments you is simply seeking recognition. Jung discovered that once acknowledged, these figures lose their destructive power and begin to guide you. Could it be that your suffering is nothing more than a neglected part of you demanding respect? The fifth step is small but deliberate. It may be saying no to an obligation that drains you, confessing a truth you normally hide, or spending time on a calling you always postpone. This is not indulgence, it is integration. Suffering shrinks when you align your outer life with your inner truth. How many of your wounds persist simply because you keep betraying yourself in small daily ways? When pain arrives, instead of asking, why me? Ask, what is this demanding I learn? This does not erase pain, but it prevents suffering. You shift from victimhood to participation in individuation. Grief becomes depth, fear becomes courage, loss becomes clarity. Without meaning, pain crushes. With meaning, pain transforms. Which stance do you choose each time life wounds you? The final step is consistency over intensity.
23 minutes daily is enough. What matters is fidelity, not grandeur. Each day you keep the pact, you weaken avoidance, loosen the mask, integrate the shadow, and honor the self. Each day you break it, you strengthen suffering's chains. Ask yourself, will you treat this practice as sacred, or will you betray yourself yet again with excuses? These practices are
Reflection journaling, dream work, imagination, small acts of authenticity, reframing pain, daily rhythm. Together, they dismantle the mechanisms that generate suffering. So here is the challenge. Are you willing to give 23 minutes to your own liberation? Or will you continue surrendering hours, days, years to unconscious repetition? 23 minutes is enough to begin, but only if you dare to begin today. Suffering does not vanish because you hope it will. It dissolves only when you face it with consciousness. Jung's warning echoes through every generation. What you repress will rule you, and you will call it fate. The truth is stark. Pain will visit you no matter. You choose it each time you avoid silence, each time you hide behind a mask, each time you betray your own self for the sake of comfort or approval. How many more days will you waste on avoidance before you admit that the cost is your very life? The gift of 23 minutes is not trivial. It is the deliberate act of sovereignty. In that space, you begin to listen to grief instead of bury it, to confront fear instead of flee, to honor truth instead of mask it. With each practice, suffering loses its teeth. And is that not the difference between a life wasted and a life redeemed, whether your wounds destroy you or transform you? Ask yourself, will you keep surrendering years to repetition, or will you claim a fraction of an hour each day to reclaim your soul? Will you continue rehearsing collapse, or will you begin the labor of integration? Write, sit, listen, confront. Do not wait for tomorrow, because tomorrow is how you have wasted your life. Begin now. End the cycle. Make pain your crown instead of your chain. And once you do, you will discover Jung's truth for yourself.